Hey, Klein Kane students. Mr. Brunel here with Classical China. I know you've been also studying or looking at Mr. Anselmi and Ms. Dixon's videos. Today we're going to be talking about Classical China or China up until 1200 CE, or what they call Dynasty Rule. What we're going to be looking at today is anywhere from this period to around this. So the Warring States period, quickly talk about the Zhou, all the way to the end of the Song Dynasty before the Mongols take over with the Yuan Dynasty. So the Mongols, we'll talk about later, hugely important, are the Yuan Dynasty. So let's talk about the Warring States of the Song. So one philosophy that you have to know is what they call the Mandate of Heaven. Each dynasty was said that they were got their authority by the gods or heavenly beings to rule. That if these dynasties fell, the next empire said, hey, you know what? They lost favor with the gods. So that's why their dynasty fell. It's because they lost, quote unquote, the mandate of heaven. And the mandate of heaven was given to us. So that mandate of heaven is hugely important to justify their rule. Because if you go against me and my dynasty, it means that you're also going against heaven or gods or the higher beings. So used by many other nations to justify their rule. So hugely important is remember the mandate of heaven. Remember. We'll talk about that with Western Europe, Africa. I mean, numerous societies and nations and empires use that same philosophy, the mandate of heaven. So hugely important. But the mandate of heaven was used to justify the dynasty rule in China. The Zhao dynasty falls, beginning of the Warring States period, in which these Warring States period, there's a lot of decentral or regional government powers. If you look at the map on the left, you see all these different regional government powers fighting for power. And when you have constantly these empires fighting for power, you also have a conflicts. And these conflicts eventually brings philosophy of what does it mean to exist? What is my role in life? How do I live in peace? Question mark. And what role does the government play? So answering those questions through these conflict or warring states. If everything's nice and peaceful, you don't really have to answer those questions because everything's good. But if you have conflict and destruction and chaos, it brings you the why am I here? Okay. So the three philosophies that go on during this time period or Warring States period are Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. Let's take a look at Confucianism first. Confucianism, Kung Fu Zi, many different spellings. Kind of a side note, I didn't get my doctorate or master's or anything in Mandarin or Chinese, so please excuse my pronunciation. I've gotten corrected many times by former Chinese students, so please bear with me. So Kung Fu Zi becomes the Confucian founder, and that's him on the right, or a depiction of him on the right. His intellects are teaching how to live life, which still exists today. There's many Confucianism ideas and philosophies that you've probably heard of, even in the United States. So the teachings on how to live life. He focused on proper relationships, and in fact, if you look on the right, it gives you the five relationships that drive society. The most important is the emperor to its subjects. So the emperor is supposed to be there and benefit the subjects, and then the subjects are supposed to give proper relationship or moral leadership or giving them proper respect to the emperor. The second most important is the relationship between the father and son, and that striving to be a superior man of the father is called Junzi. So the Junzi is that you are the superior man and that you are supposed to follow in the footsteps of that moral leader, that educated leader. So the focus is on proper relationships, education, moral leadership. A concept that comes out of this is what they call filial piety. Honor your ancestors and your elders. It creates a strict hierarchy, obligation, and obedience to those ancestors and to those elders. So a strict honor code of it, not written down, not by government, but a strict honor code that you are supposed to live in your certain area, live in your bubble, and that you are supposed to have those relationships rule. So your relationship is what you are in life, that you are the son to the father. And then when you become older, that you are the father to the son, so on and so forth. And so the strict hierarchy that you have. The Han Dynasty, and with Confucianism, is a civil service exam, hugely important, based upon Confucian principles, which we'll talk about later. The second one is Taoism or Langzhu. Many different spellings of Taoism and Taoism, so on and so forth. So the Taoism focuses on harmony with nature, unlike Confucianism, which is harmony with relationships. Taoism is harmony with nature, get rid of desires, find your balance. The yin and the yang is kind of the Taoist belief. Find your own path to enlightenment, individualistic, go out in nature, getting away from all the chaos of towns and cities and going and find your inner peace, getting rid of desires, find that balance. So peace in nature, meditation, escapism. If you've ever seen the ESPN 30 for 30, Bruce Lee, Be Like Water, it is a perfect example of Taoism, a pretty cool 30 for 30 if you ever get a chance. And if you're into Bruce Lee or martial arts, it's a pretty cool little thing that they got going on with that Bruce Lee, Be Like Water. The last one, which is completely opposite of both Confucianism and Taoism, is not a inventor or founder, but as a teacher of it, Han Fei Tzu, okay, in which he believed and he taught based on his predecessors and emphasized it even more, wrote it down. Strict law, order, maintain peace, that you have to have strict law in order to maintain that peace. And very much militaristic, very much crime, punishment if you commit a crime. So if you follow this legalistic idea, brings you great rewards. If you disobey, harsh punishment, especially criticizing of the government. So it is very, very harsh. It is very, very strict. It is very orderly, militaristic, so on and so forth. So the Qin dynasty is 1221 to 206. If you look, not very long, 15 years in its existence. They consolidate power during the Warring States period. This first emperor is Qin Shi Huangdi, who you see on the right, or a depiction of him. Which philosophy did he use? Definitely legalism. He is looked upon as the strict, if do anything wrong and I'll kill you or I'll excommunicate you or I'll do something to you if you even go against the government. So strict obedience, the state of the individual. In fact, he punished a lot of philosophers because they were also, they were Confucian and Taoist, but he burned a lot of books because he saw that as anti-government. This philosophy, this ideas that could manipulate the brain and manipulate your own thoughts, that your goal is to do whatever is best for the state. So it forced the labor on scholars. In fact, the start of the Chinese Great Wall, or China's Great Wall, was started during this time period in which he forced labors of scholars to go on the outskirts and start building the wall. Qin Shi Huangdi was obsessed with morality. In fact, he was going to take an army with him in the afterlife, and that's the Terracotta Warriors. Real quick side note, there's a excellent National Geographic episode on the Terracotta Warriors. It's pretty cool how different dress and different each one of them are very unique. You have horses, and it's pretty cool. There are thousands of warriors, thousands of horses, so on and so forth. So in the 15-year time period that he lived, amazing accomplishment. So if you get a chance, I would check that out. Qin eventually dies. His son takes over. His son is not as strict or not as well established as Qin Shi Huangdi. So it didn't last long after he died. A total of 15 years the Qin dynasty lasted. Accomplishments of it, all in the order of creating increased commerce and increased trade and increased prosperity, whether it was Chinese writing, standardizing weights and measurements, improve roads, irrigation, canals, bureaucratic government, all was established to create greater commerce. Then eventually the Qin dynasty, once it ends, the Han dynasty takes over. After the Civil War breaks out, the winner is first emperor of the Han dynasty is Liu Bang. Liu Bang is hugely important, or Emperor Guangxu. He's part of the Han clan. Cool side note on him, he was from the peasant class, so he grew up as a peasant and took over the Han dynasty, one of the few from the peasant class to eventually take over as emperor. So pretty cool. The most important ruler, though, was Han Huangdi. Han Huangdi, I should say, was the fifth emperor. He created the Imperial University. He enforced the civil service exam. So the test was based on merit, not who you know, but what you know. It's kind of similar to what we have sort of in the United States, not fully, but sort of in the United States. One of the jobs as a teacher is that you have to pass a civil service exam in order to become a teacher to make sure that you know your content. So that is an example of a civil service based test or merit. So the higher the score, you better bureaucratic job. It is all based on Confucian ideals and philosophies of that civil service exam. The most important, though, accomplishment of the Han Dynasty is the establishment of the Silk Road. It is hugely important is the Silk Road and trade when it comes to world history. Even today, if you look at trade, a huge important indicator of wealth, huge independent of the emperors and nations and kingdoms and all that kind of stuff. So the establishment of the Silk Road created that trade all the way from China to the Roman Empire all the way to China. In fact, it includes Arabian Peninsula, includes Africa, so on and so forth. So it creates this trade network and huge increase in wealth of everybody, especially the Chinese, who Chinese create the silk, named after the Silk Road, is the silk product. Silk product the Romans were obsessed with. And the Romans wanted it so much so that the Roman emperor tried to ban silk, eventually failed, but tried to ban it because Rome was going hugely into debt because everybody wanted silk. And so Rome didn't have anything trade worth of the same value as silk. So it's not just good for trade. Ideas, diseases, technology also gets traded during this time period as well. And if you look at traded today, still the same. Goods are traded today. Ideas are traded today. Disease, COVID-19, and technology trades across many different nations. Okay, so that's kind of emphasized with this Silk Road. Okay, other Han accomplishments. This is just a couple of them. The paper that we know today, cheaper books, the more education spreads, the more you have an educated society. It's one of the reasons why we have education in the United States today, a free form of public education, is to make people more intelligent. They found out that people become more intelligent, that all of a sudden a nation grows in prosperity, or a dynasty in this case grows in prosperity. The water wheel, power production, iron, steel, wheel. So all of this, and this is just a couple of them, all the way through to the compass, the sundial, ran out of space and ran out of time. I mean, just a huge amount of accomplishment that the Han Dynasty produced. So the next one is the Sui Dynasty. So after the 3 Years Kingdom Civil War, the Sui Dynasty take over, and I'm going to mention them real quick. Their accomplishments is that reunite. Their greatest accomplishment is the Grand Canal that increased communication, even the troops, the linking the rice to south to the population in the north. And what that does, it hugely increases the population during the Sui Dynasty. Okay. Another important factor is that Buddhism starts to creep into China. That's probably a terrible way of saying, but it eventually starts morphing itself into China, seen as an outsider religion by Taoism and Confucianism scholars. So it eventually leads to a little bit of the downfall of the Sui Dynasty. Eventually, the Sui fall. Why? They spend too much on canals, on the wall. They're seen as outsiders because they're more Buddhist. So the Tang eventually takes over. Li Wan is the founder. They create not the civil service exam, but a civil service exam on steroids, and called the imperial exam, which there's 3 days, 2 nights straight, no interruptions of trying to finish this test. Pretty much you're given a pitcher of water, a bucket to go to the bathroom in, and a writing utensil, and that you sit there for 3 days, 2 nights trying to accomplish this test. One cool thing during the Tang Dynasty, it was open to commoners, even though commoners didn't necessarily take the test because they couldn't afford the Imperial University. So the commoners, it was open to them, but did they really take it? Not as much as you would think, because the most amount of people that took it were the upper class because they could afford it, the Imperial University. In order to pass the imperial test, you had to pass there's 4 levels to it, and it progressively got harder and harder as it went on. And the top jobs were that level 4. Less than 2% passed all 4 of them. A very, very difficult and very lengthy and very timely test. Pretty much you had to write Confucius ideals verbatim for a 2-3 day period. And if you look at Confucian ideals, there's tons of them. who led this reform was the only empress in Chinese history called Empress Wu. She ruled for 45 years. Besides revising the imperial exam, she expanded the borders. She fought wars in Korea. She was, if you get to a chance to know or look at her, hugely important. She did a lot of cool things. So Empress Wu of all of it, Buddhist influence. She had a huge Chinese legacy, including her master, her husband, 3 sons, grandchildren, all emperors, and all related to her in some form or fashion. So if you get a chance to look at one of the truly cool females in world history, Empress Wu is definitely one of them. Other Tang accomplishments. The Golden Age is called the Golden Age because of the innovation, the peace, prosperity, how much wealth they brought in. Not only the previous sons that we talked about with traded, which was silk and plows and all that kind of stuff, but gunpowder, mechanical clocks, banknotes, so on and so forth. Dental films, woodblock. Zhonghao is an important literature, kind of like our the Homer books and Don Quixote and so on and so forth. The Zhang is one of those. Chronicles conversion from Buddhism to Confucianism to Buddhism, epics from China to India. It kind of starts falling as An Lushan rebellion starts to happen. Pretty much what that is that the marking of the end of the Tang Dynasty or the Golden Age. Pretty much the disgruntled soldier wanted to take over as emperor. It didn't really end up very well because everybody essentially died. And if you look, it's the 7th largest death toll in history. Anywhere from 13 to 36 million people died in this rebellion, proportionally the largest in history. 1/6 of the Earth's population died. So that kind of marked the beginning of the Golden Age or the end of the Golden Age. What other things that led to it? Bandits, huge floods, and eventually a famine, which killed one half of the harvest. And the government didn't know anything about it or didn't do anything about it because essentially they didn't have enough money anymore. Okay. So eventually the Northern Song take over. In the Northern Song, Emperor Taozu creates the Song Dynasty. Same thing. He creates diplomatic ties with other nations, Srivijaya, Central Asia, India, Egypt, in order to create that relationship with different nations. They had problems with neighbors constantly because of the richness of the Song in China during that time period. Eventually, they say, you know what? Most of our people are in South China anyway, so we're just going to go and live in the South. And so the Southern Song, eventually the Song moved to the South. That's where their crops are. That's where the majority of the population is, in which they defeat the Jin dynasty using this awesome little boat that you see right here, in which they use the trebuchet catapult, which is a catapult which creates greater power, firing that gunpowder bombs into the different ships, so on and so forth. So eventually they fall to Kublai Khan and the Mongols. Okay. So one of the other things during the Tang Dynasty or Song Dynasty that are hugely important: first use of paper money, the first use of coal for fuel, in which they burn coal. It burns at a hotter rate, in which you can turn lead into steel, which we still use today. Steel is hugely important when it comes to skyscrapers and so forth. Was first written formula for gunpowder, movable type, which creates a faster way to produce more stuff, more education, more books, education, so on and so forth. We see the rise of the merchant class, which they gain greater wealth as they traded foreign empires. And then we see agriculture during the Song Dynasty greatly increase, including champa rice, which is, let me go back real quick, which is right here, which is a drought-resistant rice, in which increases the carbohydrate, kind of like wheat in the Western Hemisphere. This is that staple diet that a lot of, especially the peasants, are going to use for in order to stay alive. Population surge as more agriculture becomes available, which causes urbanization and increase in patriarchy. We see the rise of Neo-Confucianism, which is essentially a blending of Confucian ideas, some Buddhism ideas, some Taoist ideas, so on and so forth. People are good, self-cultivating, civil service exams, secular ethics, and so on and so forth. But they wanted more of a rational, secular society. They wanted to get rid of religion, the superstition of Taoism and Buddhism, and focus on rational thinking and rational ideas. So that's kind of Neo-Confucianism, which is prominent during the song. And the beginning of the song, the tang, all the way to the song, is what they call foot biting. If you get a chance to look at it, it's pretty bad. If you look, this is a woman's foot right there, an X-ray that actually lasts until I think they eventually banned it in the 1920s, 1930s. So that is a woman's foot X-rayed. The ideal length of the foot was 3 inches. So they would bind your feet to make it stop growing. So it'd be less than 3 inches. So it's pretty cool if you get a look at that. So all this eventually leads to the downfall of the Chinese dynasties, and eventually leads to this next guy who is right here, who is Kublai Khan, and we'll see the Kublai Khan take over, the Mongols take over, and eventually become the Yuan dynasty. So thank you for watching. Please be safe, and hopefully we'll get a chance to see you soon.